and welcome to BUtalks. I'm your host, Karissa Paschall. Today we are interviewing Dr. Jenn Cianca, the Chair of Classical Studies and of Liberal Arts here at Bishop's University. We would like to first thank the Experiential Learning Internship Grant Fund, the Bishop's Bookstore, and the Advancement Office for making this podcast series possible. I would first like to acknowledge the territory on which we hold BUtalks. It is the traditional and unceded territory of the Abenaki First Nations and the Wabanaki Confederation. In performing this land acknowledgement, we make what was invisible visible and invite the land, the First Nations people, and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission into our conversation today. Welcome, Jenn, to our talk here today.
Thank you.
So I am going to first ask you a bit about your upbringing. In our research, we learned that you grew up with academic parents. So what was it like to grow up in that environment, and how has it influenced you to pursue your higher education?
That's a good question. So I will say a couple of things about that. Actually, my parents that have changed careers a lot over the course of their lives, and the sort of primary career that my father had when I was growing up was a preacher. So that affected me in a lot of different ways. But so I would say first he was a preacher, then he became an academic, and then my mom later went back to school and became an academic as well. So the kind of their higher education world and practice was, I was already sort of a teenager by the time that became the tenor of the household. So I kind of grew up a preacher's kid. But that had a pretty profound effect, I think, on how I view teaching and community. Like, my dad is a very powerful and charismatic speaker. He was, I mean, he's mellowed out a little bit now. But I think I learned from him this sort of concept of speaking with purpose and authenticity. And I think it's one of those things that I never really consciously thought about until someone asked me about that before. I know a few other people who are preachers' kids who talk about some of the ways that affects how they teach. Mm-hmm. So just like focus on being thoughtful, being prepared, and being authentic. So I really admired my father as a kid, and I loved the way he used to like tell jokes and then get serious and then grab people's attention and then, you know, rein them in and then let them go and like build them up and then, you know, sort of convict them. So that had a really big effect on me, I would say, more than the academic side of things, which was a little bit later. Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are really good values to have, especially in teaching. We also know that you actually did your undergrad here at Bishop's. I did.
So that's amazing. Sure did. So what is it like to be back as a faculty?
Well, this is such a wonderful place. It's a great place. I had an amazing experience here as an undergrad. I've been back for about 9 years, so I don't feel it so much on a daily basis, but the first class I taught coming back as a contract faculty person, it was January 2009, and it was in Molson 10, and it was I don't even know what it was. I think it might have been Roman religion or something. And Molson 10 was a class that I took so many classes in because I had a classics major where I did a lot of the classes I teach now, like art history style classes. And it was so weird. I walked past the row that I always sat in because I like to always sit in the same place. Like, I feel like lots of people like to always sit in the same place. Yeah. And I always sat like in the third row, like 3 in from the right, like from the teacher's perspective, right? And walking past that to the front was it was so weird. But I got over it like almost immediately. So I would say overall, one of the things that I really like about having gone here is understanding the culture. So I understand a lot about how things work from the student side, and it was a lot less steep of a learning curve for me because I already kind of know the ebb and flow of the year and like what are the big sort of party times, what are the big issues that come up, and that stuff surprisingly doesn't change so much over like 20 years.
Okay.
So it gives me a little bit of a leg up, I think.
Oh, okay. That's very interesting. And so going back to your undergrad, what kind of activities were you involved in?
So I was a music major and a classics major, double. So I was a piano major, so I spent a lot of time practicing. I was kind of in the music department a lot. I was in a band for a little while, like a soul band. So we played quite a bit in my second and third year, and then honestly, I think I was kind of like in the music department or having dinner parties with my roommates or writing papers. Okay. Like I didn't really do much beyond that because music world is pretty all-consuming, I feel, for music majors. So I feel like a lot of people, you end up in this kind of world where you eat there. I used to take naps under the piano. Spent a lot of time there. Yeah.
Okay, that's very interesting. And I know that you're involved in BU Sings.
Yeah.
In the choir here. So how does that help you become more or be more involved with the community here at Bishop?
So one of my favorite things about the choir is that we're all sort of together in it. So students, community members, profs. There's a real mix of ages, and we're working on the same project. So I like the feeling of equality that's in the choir. And it's funny because I remember I used to be kind of anxious about what would happen if like one of the students in my classes was also in choir, and like because I frankly misbehave a little bit in choir. Like I have trouble not talking, and I get told to stop talking a lot, which is a huge pet peeve of mine as a teacher. So I'm always like, oh no, they're gonna see. But it's good for me, it keeps me honest. And it's so fun, and it's such an intense experience, especially when we start ramping up for a show, and to share that with all different types of people in our community as equals, all working towards something, is really special.
Okay, that's great. So I would also like to ask about any transformative learning experiences you had in your undergrad.
Pretty central, I already mentioned the music thing. And I think probably my most powerful transformative learning experiences, depending on how we define it, but I think I know what you mean, is it would have to be related to playing the piano and the one-on-one interactions I had with my piano teacher at the time. She's an extraordinarily high-level pianist, an extraordinary musician. I idolized her. I still idolize her. She is a spectacular musician and an A+ human being. And she drove me so hard. It was like nothing was ever good enough, and it was always I used to cry all the time in my lessons, or after, because I was too proud to cry during them. Actually, I recommend not crying. There's nothing that really compares to that for me. So I know that's a little bit of a unique experience, because I think when you're an artist or you're trying to be an artist, you have this so much emotion wrapped up in it. And I think it kind of taught me that work and emotion are not supposed to be separate, you know? Mm-hmm. I'd already spent, the first, 18 years playing the piano. Well, more like 16 years playing the piano by the time I got here. But the idea of just this like systematic work that is also something that you're truly, deeply, emotionally connected to. I'm not a pianist anymore, except at home, but that's the kind of thing that I've carried with me forever, to have that, don't separate those two things, that there's so much beauty in just the systematic working at something. So I can't say that there was like a moment that was like a light bulb moment, but after I graduated, I had a real sense of how powerful that discipline was. Mm-hmm. So just the rigorous nature of that project, like a 4-year project, and then translating that into all the other work I ended up doing, like going to grad school for something totally different. So not like a bing, but a process, maybe.
She sounds like a very important professor in your academic career.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So how do you facilitate these moments as a professor, or these experiences as a professor?
I have to say I don't do that on purpose. Like, I don't know how you would do that on purpose. I don't set out to, spark transformation. I always am proud if somebody later tells me that I was part of something formative for them. I always feel really honored if somebody remembers a class or even a moment in a class as even a tiny part of their process. But I wouldn't say that I embark on that as part of my direction in teaching. So, of course, I think like most of us feel we want our classrooms to be spaces that are open, spaces that are safe, spaces where people can explore ideas, can not be afraid to be wrong. But I feel like that, that's like a kind of baseline. So I always hope that my love for what I do and how much I care about what I'm talking about translates in some way. So even if people are like, Augustus, we get it, you love Augustus. Like, even if they don't have this crazy love affair with Augustus themselves, maybe just a moment where you recognize how much love for something matters, and how they can perhaps like translate that into their own lives.
Yeah, it always helps to learn subjects that professors are passionate in. So one of your students mentioned how you brought a sword to class last semester. So what is that about?
I was teaching about gladiators. Okay. So I'm pretty sure it was Classics 101. So we do this whole broad range of, what is the ancient world and yada, yada, yada. And so we were talking about types of weapons used by the Roman military and Roman gladiators. And I have a sword, which is an amazing replica that was given to me by a bunch of graduating classics students about, I guess it was like 3 or 4 years ago. And I have it in my office. I love it. It's an amazing sword. It has like this nice like heft. So I brought it just for fun, and then also because it's one of those things like once you have it in your hand, you just don't want to put it down. It just feels really good.
Awesome. So how do these props help students understand archaeological items?
So I show a lot of images usually when I teach. So not just when I'm teaching art classes, but also when I'm teaching a more sort of general history or religion class. I like to make a sort of artistic context for what we're talking about, because I think seeing things helps people understand a little bit better. So if like it's one up from that to be able to have something actually tangible in your hand. So I also have little goddess figurines that I sometimes bring in when I'm teaching my goddess class or Greek art, and I have little Etruscan helmets for when I'm teaching early Roman art. And so I feel, if you can't go to a museum, or if you can't go to Greece, or you can't go to Rome, it just feels more real, I think, to see something, and definitely to touch it if it's ever possible.
Yeah, well, swords are super cool.
You can come by and see it anytime. Just makes you feel powerful.
Awesome. To move on along the vein of Greece, your book, Sacred Ritual, Profane Space, The Roman House as Early Christian Meeting Space, is coming out in June. Yay. And would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
This book was my PhD dissertation, which I did at the University of Toronto in the Department of Religion. And it is a kind of exploration. I do a lot of work on space and place and sort of what constitutes sacred space, especially. So kind of what's the relationship between bodies and the spaces that we inhabit, and how does a space affect us and our bodies, and how do our bodies affect space? So the book is a kind of, half of it is like a review of all the literature and the architecture that we have from the earliest period of Christianity. And the second half is a kind of creative imagining of the data that we have, which is not extensive. So we know, for example, that early Christians met in houses, but we don't have any houses that we know they met in. So, because they're all destroyed. So we have to just kind of imagine how it worked. So I try to take what we know from text and what we know about architecture, generally speaking, in the Roman world, and just kind of superimpose it on there, and have a sort of creative imagining of how they would use that space and some of the weird problems that would arise in families and spaces, because Roman houses, like, you give birth there, you have coming of age rituals, you're married there, bodies are laid out there. Of course, like, all these other sort of weird polluting things that you don't associate with the sacred all happen and unfold there. So it's just kind of an exploration of that.
Sounds very interesting. What was the research that you did to gather for this book?
So I did, it's a pretty interdisciplinary project. So I did a ton of textual analysis, so just gathering like every single piece of text evidence about early Christian worship. And then I did a bunch of site research. So I went to Pompeii and Herculaneum in southern Italy, and then Ostia near Rome, which all have kind of Roman domestic space that still exists that you can go and look at and walk around in. And then also, much more boringly, like, read so many field reports from archaeological excavations, just looking through, looking at every single house layout in Pompeii to see what it looks like. So I had a real sense of all the different variations. And then I did a sort of theoretical analysis of, what is space, what is sacred, what is what are bodily practices, what are functions of homes, and so on. So I kind of did all this stuff, which I think was really concerning to my supervisor initially, who was like, "This is a dog's breakfast." That's a direct quote from him. But I sort of had to wrangle it into something, which eventually happened. So.
That's great. When you visited these archaeological sites, what surprised you, and what was different from like when you studied them just in books or in lecture?
I think probably what surprised me the most, at least in terms of Roman houses, is that they're really small. Okay. I was like, how does anybody live here, let alone have 50 people over for ritual practice? I have loved Greece, and particularly Rome, because I'm of Italian descent. So I have loved it since I was a little kid. So I've seen a lot of pictures and like watched a lot of films and pored over lots of books. So when I went to, let's say some of the more monumental sites like the Colosseum or something in Rome, I don't know if it was surprise so much as the opposite. Like, it was almost a feeling of recognition, like when I don't know if you've ever had that experience where you just finally encounter something or someone and it feels like you've known them forever. That's kind of how it felt for me. Like, just to have that moment, it was really, really special for me. Wow. Especially those monumental sites in Rome. Really special.
Okay. That sounds like an amazing experience.
Yeah. I'm planning one.
Okay.
For next spring.
Do you have a title yet?
No, not yet. So a fourth year student next year is going to be helping me organize all of the sort of details of an Italy trip. So what are the best sites? Which ones do we have access to? What kinds of permissions do we need? And then because we've done Greece and Egypt in the past, and so we never had one in Italy. So I'm planning that one, and hopefully, some like 12 to 15 students will go, and we'll hit all the sites.
Perfect.
Maybe spark some of that recognition or surprise for some of those people too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So do you know when you'll have that a little bit more finalized?
It'll be finalized by the fall.
Okay.
Like
Perfect.
October, probably October, early October.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
That sounds like an exciting opportunity for students.
Pumped.
Awesome.
Yeah.
How can we use religion to deconstruct gendered spaces?
Excellent question. So this is something that I didn't do explicitly in my book, but that's implicit because I talk a lot about domestic spaces. And of course, in the ancient world, a lot of women, the home was a place of actual power for them. So even though the head of the household was usually male, if he was still alive, there was a certain measure of power and responsibility that women enacted in the home. And so it's really interesting, especially in the context of early Christianity, to see how a space like the home is kind of a place of power for women. And when early Christians met there were a lot of women who were in positions of power in early Christianity. And it moves out of the home, and then women disappear from those places and those roles of power. On the one hand, domestic space is like, oh, it's women's work, like raising the kids and educating them and so on. But in this context, it really is, she has a strong voice and strong power and managing the household, hiring people, firing people, doing the books. Mm-hmm. And so this space is gendered pretty strongly in her favor. And so when an outside group comes in, they kind of succumb to the gendering of that space. And then when they leave it, that sort of starts to drop off because the public life is so focused on the male in the Roman world. So to me, that provides like a really explicit example of how powerful spaces are in constructing the way that we perceive gender. And I think sacred spaces or religious spaces, however you want to term it, like doubly so, if not infinitely more so, because those spaces carry with them such sort of ritual power or religious power. So there is this kind of, in my opinion, there's a very intimate link between religion, space, and gender. So I give you an ancient example, but I mean there are lots of examples like that. Yeah. Still.
It sounds like studying these spaces can be very empowering for women.
I think it can be. So sometimes, that example in particular, I think can be exciting. And then also sometimes the opposite, where you see this kind of the denigration of women in the ancient world. And so that can sometimes be sort of reverse empowering. So you see kind of, we've come a long way, baby, sort of thing. But there are always powerful examples of women doing groundbreaking, inspirational things in the ancient literature, even in the most like misogynistic, anti-female societies. You see these kind of beacons of lady hope.
That's good to take into account.
Yeah,
absolutely. So how is classical studies relevant in our lives today?
One of the things that is most powerful about studying classics is that you have the luxury of looking at something from its beginning to its end. And so, and I say this a lot when I'm talking about, why study classics, but when you're in something in the moment, there are always lessons to learn, and it's exciting because it's growing and you feel, you're making changes, and those changes are sometimes palpable in your lifetime. But when you're looking at an ancient civilization, you see how it starts, you see its rise, you see the success, and then inevitably you see it die. And there are so many lessons in there. What were the political structures that went awry? What are the ideologies that arose that ended up causing conflicts between particular types of people? What sorts of ethnic issues arose that some people addressed well and some people addressed atrociously? When does a society, what is the moment, can you pinpoint the moment where a society starts to tank, you know? And there are often, a lot of people have, you know, many scholars have compared the U.S. to Rome for many years, and the U.S. Itself has been modeled on Rome in many ways. You know, they adopt the eagle standard, which is the Roman symbol for power. And so there are these little hints of impending failure, you know, that I think you have a special lens on, or a special avenue into, when you study ancient cultures, because they're much more obvious to you than if you're just in them, right? It's not, I don't know if that sounds depressing or if it sounds hopeful. I'm not sure. To me, I always feel like it's fascinating to see that, just like I said before, like that slice of life where you can see all of the ways that things work or don't. And then it's not like you can easily graft it onto everything that's happening, but you see, you know, when rhetoric becomes racist or insular, or when empires get too big, they get bloated and the center can't hold, right? And there's a devolution of ideals, and people choosing sides and factions and so on. So to me, that's a special lens that only history can provide, and particularly ancient history, because everything is and everyone is dead. Even the languages are dead, right?
Yeah.
So Greek, for example, I always tell my students, it's a perfect language. There are almost no exceptions in it. Like, you know how in English, if you're trying to explain to somebody how grammatical structure works, you can explain the rule to them, and then you have to tell them the 16 ways that that's not true sometimes. And people are like, that doesn't make any sense. Greek is perfect because it didn't last long enough to get ruined. Okay. So I also think that's fun, and it helps you understand the structure of other languages too. Yeah. But that's a tangent. So.
We know that you're proficient in ancient Greek. Do you have any favorite phrases?
Oh, my favorite phrase that I always say to students is me frontise, which means don't worry.
Oh, great.
Or you could even say me frontise chairete, which means don't worry, be happy.
Oh, that's great. Awesome. I know that you love the Minoan snake goddess.
Ooh, I do.
Yeah. What would you like to tell us about her, and why is she so important to you?
Well, I wish I had brought my replica snake goddess with me, because I could show it to you.
Is it life size?
No, it's well, it's the same size as it really was, which is just little. Oh, she is fierce. She has these wild eyes. She's topless, except she's wearing like a little bolero jacket, which I enjoy, with this big fringed skirt, and she's holding up these two snakes that are writhing in her hands. So, I mean, she's a symbol of power. She's a symbol of warding off evil. She is aesthetically pleasing, but also, I mean, she's like a tenacious, powerful force.
Awesome.
So,
seems like
she's like my avatar.
Great.
Yeah.
Students in certain departments are often faced with questions like, what are you going to do with that degree? So have you ever faced these questions? And what advice would you give to students that are asked these questions? Yes.
So I think probably all departments get questions like that, but especially departments in the humanities, and primarily the sort of old school ones like classics, philosophy, religion. We get that a lot. So I am not good at and not interested in sort of external marketing. But if a student comes to me and says, you know, I really love this, but what good is it doing? So, you know, if you're having like a real question, you know, I'm having a quandary about my future. I truly believe that studying something that you love regardless of what it is it's a beautiful luxury that we have here to take this time and to explore questions. And when it comes to classics, I can give a bunch of stock answers, like lots of people go into law, lots of people end up shifting gears and going into medicine, lots of people get into journalism. It's very writing heavy. It's very sort of critical analysis heavy. It's also pretty interdisciplinary, so people go in all sorts of directions beyond the really obvious, like museum curator, grad school professor, etc. But every discipline at the BA level is essentially the same. None of them really feeds a particular career any more straightforwardly than another. And so the sort of discipline wars, I think, are not really relevant, and it's much more about whether a student is being fed by what they're looking at. Are you being fed by what you're reading? Are you feeling like a richer, deeper, more engaged human being by studying what you're studying? And if the answer is no, then stop doing that and go do something that makes you feel that way. So whether it's a shift in discipline or anything, or even leaving school, if you're not being fed, then you're not building yourself. And that in a dream world, everybody gets to find that thing. So I know that some people feel that way about classics. I also know that some people don't feel that way about classics, and that's fine. It's about sort of finding that space. But I always discourage students from thinking just job. Even though, of course, I recognize the reality of, economic stability and future and so on. But this is like a beautiful little moment to explore and to find something that makes you strong and gives you profound experiences, So
when did you feel that you were at home in your studies? Like, that's where you belonged?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I had a bit of a quandary in my undergrad because, as I mentioned, I was doing a double major. They were very different from each other. So I had to make a decision when I graduated as to whether I would pursue music or whether I would pursue academia in the shape of studying ancient religions was the thing that I really loved. And it was really hard for me to make that choice. And ultimately, I decided that I had more questions and more skill on the academic side than I did in music. So as much as I loved making music and I loved the sort of collaborative power of music, I'm not as good at it as I would like to be, was never gonna play Carnegie Hall, and so I felt especially that I had more questions, and so I knew I'm not done with these questions. So I would say probably it wasn't really until I started my PhD, because I took some time off between my master's and my PhD and had that whole quandary all over again. But once I started my PhD program, I was like, I'm committed. This is my choice. This is what I'm doing. And if I didn't feel at home there, I certainly do here. So maybe it's even here that I've actually felt settled into what I'm doing.
Well, that self-awareness is really important to have, but it's hard. It can be hard to obtain.
It can be a struggle, and that's okay too, right? Like we all have that
absolutely
struggle.
So what pursues you to continue lecturing and growing as a professor and as an academic here at Bishop's?
So I think part of it is those questions. Like I have so many questions, So teaching gives me a reason to look at those questions. Perfect example, I'm teaching an Egyptian art class this semester. Egypt is not one of my areas of expertise, but it's an area of lifelong fascination. And I wouldn't ever spend all of this time, as much as I wanted to, learning about and examining and digging through stuff and finding pictures and trying to craft a narrative arc for a course. I would never do that on my own, even if I was like, man, I wish I knew more about Egyptian art. So it gives me this amazing opportunity through stress and panic to sort of produce answers to those questions. But also, I don't know, I can't imagine doing anything else. Like, don't have any trouble, like, do I want to keep going? Do I want to do this? I honestly wake up every day and want to do what I'm doing. Like, I don't always want to wake up at 7, but I always want to wake up and do what I'm doing.
That's great. We're really happy to have you here at Bishop's.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
And do you have any last comments for our audience here today?
Be open to explore and to say yes to things as much as possible. So I know there's always that danger, like I'm overextended or I say yes to too many things, but I don't know if any of you have been in drama or know anything about improv, but there's always this thing where if you're in a scene with someone and they say, let's do this. If you say no, then the scene's over. But so you're supposed to say yes and. So you say yes and then you build on it and you add something that you want. And I think that's such a great way of looking not just at theater but at life and certainly education. So if someone says, hey, do you want to check out this lecture on Thursday? Try saying yes instead of saying, I wanted to be in my gym jams, like watching Netflix, which of course you do, but just to try to say, you know what? Yeah, I'll go and just see, because you don't know. I just feel like you can't force transformation. So all you can really do is be open to it and make space for it, hold space for it, open yourself to it.
Yeah, that's a fantastic attitude to have. And I think luckily Bishop's is blessed with many students who take that approach to life and to learning. Mm-hmm. So it's great.
I think so too. It's one of the things that makes it special here, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming in today and participating in our new podcast series, BUtalks. If you would like to learn more about Dr. Jenn Cianca, or if you would like to purchase her book, feel free to follow the links in the description.
Well, I'm glad that you didn't ask me about the bug. I will tell you the story then. So I think this story came up when someone was asking me, what does it feel like to write a dissertation, like a PhD thesis? And I was talking about how it's really fun and exciting for a little while, and then it becomes like the most isolating drudgery ever. And I was finishing my thesis in Divinity House, Divinity. And it was the summer and there's no one around and I was feeling so isolated and I'm just writing. And I had a time limit because if I didn't finish, I wouldn't be able to keep my job here. So I was like really under a lot of stress. And there was this little pine bug. I don't know if you know what they look like. They're like really flat and they move very slowly. Okay. And they're not a scary bug. They're just kind of like, just move really slowly. And I looked over one day when I was feeling really bummed out and there was this little pine bug on the windowsill next to me. And then I noticed that he was always there, just chilling. He'd like walk back and forth. He never went off the windowsill. Sometimes he'd go out, like sort of out the window a little bit and then come back in. And it just, honestly, it made me feel less alone while I was writing what would eventually become my book. And I was like, thank God for you, buddy. Like, you're the greatest. So the sad part about that story is that Divinity had wasps. It always had wasps. And they sprayed for wasps, and he died.
Oh, no.
So I went in one day and he was all curled up. Oh, R.I.P. No, I didn't. I know that sounds like a crazy, weird story, but maybe I draw the line at making like a little coffin for him.
Yeah.
But it was, I'm still grateful. Thanks. Bye.